Okay, so the last thing that we're working on is the sphere, and I'm going to have a paper towel ready. My cup of water is clean, and I have water in my blue and my green and my yellow. So all of these colors are ready to go, and they are wet, ready to paint. So I'm going to make sure that my paintbrush doesn't have a lot of excess water in it, and I'm going to pick up some yellow and start painting using those curved lines, cross contours that we have learned about before. I'm going to add in some water and really get this paper a little bit more wet, following along the edge of my sphere here, just so that the color blends a little bit better. Because I am adding the water in, keeping the paper wetter for longer. Now I've noticed that I didn't leave myself a really good highlight, so I'm going to take my paper towel and just lift some of that paint off. And that's going to allow me to bring my highlight back. You can see how it already starts to blend along that wet edge. I'm going to blend this up in curved lines towards that highlight. Sometimes you have to rinse your brush out and wipe it off and just move the pigment around that's already on your paper, because if you add more paint or more water, you're just going to end up having a harder time blending it. Using the pigment and the water that's already there and a relatively dry paintbrush is going to help you move your watercolor around. So I'm wiping my paintbrush off so that I can move the watercolor around that's already on the paper instead of adding more. So now I'm going to add more green below this. It's kind of like you just add a layer of something and then you blend it in. And then you add another layer and you blend that in. Because you're hoping to get rid of all of those harsh lines. Don't forget, you can always wipe your brush off so that you can move the pigment that's already on the paper instead of adding more pigment or more water. So now I'm going to add some water because it's going to help keep my paper wet while I add in my next color, which is the blue. And I'm adding it lower. I'm not adding it right up next to the green because I'm going to use that water to help me blend it up into the green. I can always add more watercolor, but once it's on there, it's hard to take off. I'm going to dry my paintbrush off so I can work with the paint that's on my paper instead of adding any more. This is a trick I use for acrylic paint too. Okay, and then adding more blue down below. I'm going to wipe my paintbrush off so I can work with the paint that's on the paper and not add any more paint or water. Add more blue. It's going to be the darkest section here. Now I'm just adding water here, so it's taking the pigment that's already on the paper and blending it up into the other sections. And because I know purple is really great on top of blue to make a nice dark value, I'm going to add some purple onto my blue. I wouldn't use purple by itself because it just isn't dark enough. Now I'm going to take a dry paintbrush. I'm not dry brushing, I am moving the pigment that's already on my paper. And if you find that your paint just really is not blending properly, remember our glazing technique, where you can take a really thin layer of paint and blend it out and layer it up to create a gradation or a wash or a fade. Glazing is really great for that. So I'm kind of glazing purple over the bottom here to create a darker value or a shadow. One thing that we don't always talk about when we talk about spheres is reflected light, which is light bouncing off of the table and hitting the surface of your sphere. So I want you to give this a try. Right here where it's a little darker, right in this area right here. We're going to try and get an area that can represent reflected light. We're going to do some lifting. So you're going to take your paintbrush and get it wet with just some clean water, and then draw some lines that are curved in this edge so that it seems as if your watercolor is lightening. Then take your paper towel and blot that area. And now you have an area that has reflected light. You can soften the edges with just your wet paintbrush. So this is light that has reflected off of the table and is bouncing back up at your sphere. If you find that you have lost your highlight, you could do the same thing. Up at the top, you're just going to paint with water, and then lift that watercolor away. Do you see how bright that got? Oh my gosh, that's way too bright. So I'm just going to take a little bit of yellow and glaze it back into that section. Perfect. There we go. That is the sphere. Now give one a try yourself with your own 3 colors of light, medium, and dark. A try yourself with your own 3 colors of light, medium, and dark.